Hello, party people. Welcome. The hardest part about being homeless for me was the complete and utter lack of hope. I'm not speaking about anybody else's experience. I can only speak about my own. But for me, it was that. It was the complete and utter lack of hope, the truly held belief that yesterday was shit, today is shit, so tomorrow's gonna be shit. I was homeless for years as a youth. This is because I came from a house where violence lived. And so I escaped onto the streets because at 13, the streets were safer than my home. The meth that I used could make sure that I endured the elements, that I could stay awake so I could stay safe, and most importantly, so I wouldn't feel hungry. So I know, I remember what it's like to not have anywhere to go. I remember what it's like to do the inner city shuffle, walking on bleeding and blistered feet from place to place to place to place all day and all night, because you know if you stop anywhere, that's when the trouble starts. That's when they come for you. That's when the cops show up. That's when people attack you. I remember what it's like to have so little to eat when you finally did get a decent meal. It was just gonna come back up. I remember what it was like to be followed in the stores, to have nowhere to wash myself or my clothes. I remember what I smelled like. I couldn't do anything about it. I remember experiencing violence, sometimes from the people who were supposed to protect me, sometimes from people who seemed to drive around and target people like me, and sometimes, yes, from people in my exact same circumstances. I remember being cold. Homelessness in Canada is about the cold. Trying to find a spot. Remember when you used to be able to get into the front lobby of every apartment? For an hour or two, you could sleep and be warm till someone came along. I remember being so cold that when finally someone gave me a cigarette, my hand was shaking so hard I couldn't light it. It's into that kind of situation that so many who work in homelessness come and say, get to work, set some goals, get sober. Why? When your life is completely bereft of hope, bereft of the belief that tomorrow could be better, why? Our job, all of us in this room and all of us at this conference, is to increase the amount of hope in the world. Not with good intentions, not with authoritarian policies designed to arrest our way out of homelessness, not with unrealized promises, but with provable action, with bold ideas and even bolder follow-through. With caring so much about the people that we serve that we use the very best of evidence and the smartest of our ideas, the biggest of our brains, and to never stop working, to prove with evidence that while yesterday may have been shit, and while even today might be shit, tomorrow can be better. And again tomorrow, and again the tomorrow after that, and the tomorrow after that. In a moment, we're going to hear from someone who lives in hope. Guy Felicella grew up in a middle-class home in British Columbia, but due to trauma, undiagnosed ADHD, and difficulty in home and in school, he fell into addiction at a young age. Guy spent 30 years in the repeated cycle of gangs, addiction, treatment, and jail. He spent nearly 20 years residing in a 2-block radius in Vancouver's notorious downtown East Side. Miraculously, with sheer determination and the help of others through harm reduction and recovery, Guy managed to survive the HIV/AIDS crisis in the downtown East Side, 2 decades of homelessness, multiple life-threatening bone infections, and 6 drug overdoses. Today, Guy has escaped the grips of the turmoil that kept him suffering and currently resides with his wife and 3 young children with over a decade of recovery and sobriety under his belt. Guy is passionate about advocating for the vulnerable people who still suffer with addiction and mental health, and is adamant about educating communities on the importance of a full spectrum of care, from harm reduction to recovery, and to eliminate the stigma that exists around drug addiction. Guy is a sought-after international public speaker who shares his personal experience and expertise at conferences, seminars, summits, and TED Talks. Guy attends various school districts and post-secondary institutions to educate students on drug addiction. Guy spent nearly his entire life suffering with addiction and is now using his experience to change the hearts and minds of people. He cares deeply about giving back to communities that helped him through his darkest times, and is focused on spreading his message of hope to those struggling, to young families, to young people, and to the world. As a featured speaker, Guy will share his story, one of survival, of transformation, and of hope, as well as his vision for a future without homelessness, where nobody has to go through a similar experience. Please join me in welcoming Guy Felicella.
Good morning, everybody. Truly humbled. I don't get anywhere without people like you. And I want you guys to understand something, that the unity in here of what I've experienced is that when you go back to your communities, it's not just you by yourself. You have a force behind you of people. And you bring hope to people who are truly struggling. Homelessness is the most mentally and physically punishing condition that I've ever experienced in my life. It will break your spirit, and it broke mine many times. And so I hope my story inspires you as people to do better and be better, because people depend on you. And I just want to say that what we're connected with here is what we need to continue to force people in our municipalities and communities to address the crisis where it is. Sadly, we've made housing a privilege instead of a human right in our country. That has to change. Just get through some logistics before I start getting into my story, but typically what most people believe that substance use or people who struggle with addiction is a homeless population. Yes, it's true. People who use drugs are homeless, often to distract themselves from the madness and the chaos in their lives of not being able to mentally rest. But a more accurate picture is that in every community I've ever been in every workforce that I've ever spoken to, there's people struggling with substance use and addiction. This is the accurate picture. So how we vision, or how society visions people who struggle with substance use is incorrect. Your bank teller, your Safeway clerk can be anybody, your next door neighbor. People don't talk about it. The scope of the crisis in British Columbia is catastrophic, and not only in British Columbia, but right across Canada. Second and only in cancer in terms of potential years, lives lost, but the leading cause of death in British Columbia between the ages of 10 to 59 is the unregulated toxic poison drug supply. Unacceptable. And one of the things that we often don't reflect on or talk about is how we got here. Stigma has become just as deadly as the drugs themselves. Stigma is created in three primary forms: structural laws and policies that creates a social stigma, people like us, how we view people who struggle, who use substances. And that is the self-stigma that the individual feels, whether they're homeless or struggling with substance use. It's the main reason why people use in isolation. It's the main reason why people don't reach out for help. And it's the main reason why people die alone. How sad is that? Social isolation is one of the biggest impacts in our society that we don't talk about. People are struggling with loneliness. I'm humbled by life. I know I'm not supposed to be here. To medical science, I'm a miracle. To doctors, I'm diagnosed with an opioid use disorder, substance use disorder. But to society, I'm a junkie, I'm a loser, and I'm a criminal. What if I told you that pain didn't start here? It started here. I grew up in a middle-class home in Richmond, BC. Mom, dad, brother, sister, nice house, money. And from the outside, everything looked good. However, what you didn't see inside was domestic violence, verbal abuse, alcoholism, physical abuse. I describe my childhood as cloudy with a chance of thunder and lightning, unpredictable. I navigated around the household like a soldier would a landmine field, knowing where the cracks in the floor were. Who thinks like that at such a young age? Who has to process things like that? It developed my own anxiety, depression, self-hatred towards myself. How we speak to people can have a profound impact on their lives. I describe verbal abuse as the most crippling abuse in my life. I'd rather get beaten. I could get over bruises, but I couldn't shake the assault in my mind. I was always trying to turn the volume down in my head. I was looking for ways and means to distract myself. You can ask anybody in this room, are you happy? Or are you distracting yourself from sadness? Because there's a big difference. And even though happiness and sadness are both fleeting emotions, I will tell you this, that the one thing that often eluded my life was peace. In school, I was called hyper, difficult, and hard to manage. I was good at starting fights. I wasn't good at understanding things. I was compared to other students as, what's wrong with you? Why can't you learn like everybody else? I didn't know. Sometimes we'd come home from school on a Friday and my mom would have our bags packed and we'd go over to her mom's place in Victoria. And maybe I get a little bit of hope that things would get better. Not to say that my mom didn't have her own challenges, she did, but those two together were like dynamite. Even as a young kid, I knew this. But she always go back. It's something I couldn't understand. As a youth and young kid, you can't understand adult issues, but how it impacts your life. Long before the drugs became an issue in my life, I was looking for ways to distract myself. And one of the things that was good for me as a young kid is that I was good at sports. I wasn't the best player. I was often called on by my coaches as a person that played with a lot of heart, a lot of grit. I was tough to play against. And maybe it was the characteristics of my household that was developed of I just played tough. Finally, positive affirmations for your coaches instead of the negative assault that's in your head. But sadly, those games and practices are an hour here and an hour there, and you're back surrounded in your environment. And you struggle. Things got bad. I didn't really, I wouldn't look at life the way like everybody else did. I got to a place in my life where the distractions were too overwhelming and that I needed an outlet. I sadly thought that I would end my life. And then I found the greatest thing I ever found in the world, street drugs. They just took it all away. They took away the pain. They gave me the ability to cope. But what I couldn't understand at 12 years old, and what no kid could understand, is that the drugs that actually saved my life were going to progress into one day the drugs that were going to try to end my life. But all I was trying to do was survive. And then I got involved with gangs. Gangs were grooming me. I was a prime candidate. If you can't find love and acceptance in the places that you're looking for it, you'll seek it elsewhere. But what I couldn't understand is what I was unleashing in my life and what it would turn into. Gang squad task force, 24-hour surveillance, rival gangs coming after the imminent threat of death was all around me as a young kid. By 14, I was incarcerated in juvenile detention for 1 year under the Old Offenders Act. At the same time, my family came to court and they made me a ward of the court, which is something that no 14-year-old could understand, but I heard what was mentioned in that courtroom. That all the challenges that are happening in our household is because Guy is uncontrollable. We can't take care of him anymore. I remember the probation officer taking me to the institution saying to me, at least you won't have to go back in that environment. The maddening thing that I still look back on is that as dysfunctional as it was, I knew how to survive that. I knew the good, the bad, the ugly, how to get through it. Another bump, another hit, I just get by. What I didn't know was what I was going to have to survive in prison. Fear. Now, Guy's always had somebody put in his life for the right reason, at the right moment, at the right opportunity. And the first lady to ever treat me with kindness was a lady named Sandy Gooby at the institution that I was brought to. And I'll tell you, when they walked me into that institution and she came and grabbed me, I can still hear the thunderous crack of a steel door slamming behind me. And the fear that came into my life, realizing that there was no escaping this. I was going to have to figure out how to deal with prison. And I remember getting into her office and I burst into tears and I told her that I wanted to go home, and she said, I know. I said, I can't get through this. I know how to survive my household. She said, we'll get through it together, Guy. They put me in school in the institution and immediately I struggled. She was the first person to understand that, listen, for whatever reason, he's having challenges in school. They put me in the kitchen. They said I would learn life skills through that, and baking and measurements would be the math. They looked at a different way of approaching me. And I thrived. And those positive affirmations from the food that I was cooking inside an institution made me feel good. The first thing I ever learned was to make a vanilla cake, and I realized how easy icing was to make. But somebody was teaching me a way that I could understand. And sadly for me, after 1 year and I was being released, I told Sandy that I wanted to stay. Jail had become a safer place for me. I had to go to a group home. I didn't want to go. I called her from the group home. I got into a group home that was in the UBC area, which was a really nice area of town. And I called her and I was in tears and I wanted to come back. And I told her I'd break the law, and she says, you can't come back. You can only come to this institution once. She said, Guy, somebody's going to help you like I did. And she was right. Somebody did take over and help me. But sadly for me, as in group homes, you're bounced around from home to home and school system to school system, and I just became in the same unpredictable environment that I had grown up with in my life. And so I started running away from everyone and everything. People would say I choose to be homeless. No, the environment I was living in was too chaotic. I had no choice. I had to leave. The system had failed, but I was blamed. It's easier to blame people than it is to change the system. And then I started running away into the downtown east side of Vancouver at a very young age. Got involved with the gangs again. The drugs got harder, they got faster. Life got worse. I described the first time that I entered into the downtown east side as comforting, as a community of people, something that people don't often reflect on. But what I understood is this, is that it was comforting in knowing and seeing other people struggling with pain like me. You don't feel so alone then. Even though we weren't healing each other, we were just trying to do what we could do to get by. But it was also very intimidating. I didn't sleep in the area. I slept behind 38th and Dunbar, which is a very nice area in Vancouver, behind the Dunbar Community Center. The ladies in the community center used to allow me to come in and take a shower, give me a coffee and a muffin. They knew me as the homeless person. Always surface conversations with people. I'm not opening the vault to anybody. You carry a tremendous amount of shame, the negative assaults that still go through your head. And it got bad. And I just, going back and forth from Dunbar to the downtown east side, I just got stuck and never going back. And from 1983 to 1993, I was in and out of the downtown east side, and then from 1993 to 2013, I just was really struggling in the downtown east side of Vancouver, and the only time I ever left there was either to be in prison or to go try treatment, surrounded in a 2-block radius. I've heard it all from people. You're hopeless, a piece of garbage, incorrigible, not willing to change. I remember surviving those dueling public health emergencies in the 90s, which was the HIV/AIDS crisis and the overdose crisis. I've lost many friends, died of AIDS. I've lost many friends who have died of overdoses. Surviving 5 osteomyelitis bone infections, 4 in my left leg, 1 in my back, where I had to relearn how to walk again. The relentless punishment of how people view you as an individual drives you into a form of isolation. People would say, "You're going to die." My response back was, "Well, when?" I was okay with it. I was suffering as a human being and didn't see no end in sight. One of the biggest impacts in a controversial, shouldn't be controversial, is a supervised consumption site in the downtown east side of Vancouver. I've used this facility over 4,000 times in a 10-year time frame. People have created this division in our society. It's easy to blame harm reduction. We are trying to reduce the harms of the toxic drug crisis to save people's lives. If you look at the reflection of what Insights meant in 20 years, it's over 3 million visits, 12,000 overdose reversals. That's 12,000 family members, friends, loved ones. Over 70,000 referrals to off-site services, which includes detox and treatment, and 0 deaths. My last overdose occurred February 18th, 2013, booth 5 at the supervised consumption site, where I lay motionless on the floor. The nurse describes it as guy was gone for 8 minutes. His oxygen levels were gone. There was nothing left. We'd done everything we could. I've never remembered overdosing. It's like that. There's no feeling. I've only remembered opening my eyes. In this particular moment, when I opened my eyes, I could see the nurse was visibly emotional, and my response to her was, "Why are you crying?" And she said, "Because I care." And I just burst into tears. I told her, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't know how to stop. I'm good at getting sober. I'm just not good at staying sober. But I know that I'm going to die. I don't want to die anymore. And she said, I'm going to help you like always, Guy. What often people don't remember or reflect on is that there's 2 lines at that supervised consumption site. One to go and inject drugs safely and one to go into detox. But only people judged me for being in the lineup to use drugs. Nobody knew where I was going. Nobody understood the story behind the individual. People only could see what they could see, and then you judge. If you don't know the story behind the individual, listen, then you don't know. And so upstairs I went again, trying to rebuild my life. Gabor Mate was my doctor for many years in the downtown east side of Vancouver, and one day in detox, he came up to me and said, Guy, can I ask you a question? I said, sure. He said, are you enjoying your life? I said, God, this is so painful. I don't know why I do the things I do. He dropped a bomb in my life. He said, Guy, I don't think your problem is the drugs. I said, but everybody says it's the drugs. I get off the drugs and my life gets better. Sure, a little bit. Maybe I had a bed to sleep in. Maybe I had a roof over my head. Maybe I had some people checking in on me. But you know what didn't get better? That this loser junkie was still no good in the world. That never got better. You know what never got better is every time I finished treatment, I was homeless. Every time I left a prison cell, I was homeless. Why would anybody go do something else that is only going to put them back what they're trying to break free from? He said, there's a reason why you use drugs the way you do. Tell me about your childhood. And the tears, I froze. I'm a tough guy. I understand how to survive. But I built a prison to keep people outside. I was more fearful of you seeing how weak I was as a human being. I just didn't want any negative abuse anymore. I just wanted to live. I didn't want to deal with it. He got me to just take down one brick, just so the light would come in a little bit. Lo and behold, I was diagnosed with ADHD. Go figure. It all made sense. I shared right away with the specialist that I felt stupid my whole life. I walk into a room like this, I'm the dumbest one in here. I remember her just snapping me off, saying, no, you're one of the smartest ones in here because of what you've had to go through and how you've had to survive and navigate your life. Does anxiety ever go away? No. It's okay too. I'll tell you what gets better, though. We learn how to manage it a lot better in our lives. And there's nothing wrong with having anxiety or depression. We're people. That's what meant the most. I left the downtown east side of Vancouver with one set of clothes on my back and a welfare check with a life decimated with nothing. I left with nothing. The interesting thing is that addiction is a chronic relapsing condition. If you separate the social determinants of health, you can't. Has to be included. Mental health and addiction and all the social determinants of health must be addressed. It cannot be separated. Get off the drugs. Easy to say, very hard to do. You guys all know what a relay race is? This is harm reduction and recovery working together. They're on the same team. You pass that baton back and forth as many times as possible, because without a harm reduction safety net, relapse and addiction is a chronic relapsing condition, and without that safety net of supervised consumption sites, access to safer alternatives, access to housing, I will tell you this, if there is not this safety net underneath it, we fail. And if harm reduction didn't exist, I wouldn't exist. My recovery wouldn't exist. My kids wouldn't exist. None of these kids would be alive today. Big picture. Everybody deserves the same opportunity that I had in this world. If we don't give people opportunity and purpose, then we've failed. People need a chance. People need hope. There's something that is so big in this room that sometimes we take for granted as people. Something that you all possess. Something that maybe you don't always reflect on. But I will promise you this. The power of human connection can change the direction of people's lives. I've witnessed it. That connection with people is a gift. It is the most powerful thing I've ever experienced in my life. I'm going to share with you a few quick stories in closing, just how powerful human connection was in my life. My grandmother, who loved me, never gave up on me, cared about me, knew all the challenges that I faced. When I fell into the downtown east side at a young age, it really limited my contact with her, but my grandmother showed up twice a year, every year, usually around my birthday, around Christmas, to take me to the spaghetti factory in Gastown, tell me how much she loved me. Never told me what I needed to do. I said, what does everybody else say? Oh, they just think I'm some batshit crazy old lady that's going to get robbed on the downtown east side of Vancouver. Oftentimes, too, if my grandmother couldn't find me, there'd be people walking with her that didn't look like a robbery in progress, that looked like people trying to connect family members, so. And then she couldn't always come down. As time got on, she got older and sicker. But she'd always send 2 cards to the supervised consumption site. I'd get them from the nurses with money in them and just a little bit of hope inside. Love you, guy. Something really simple, but meant a lot. And then in 2013, when I left the downtown east side and I met my wife, in November, she became pregnant with our first child. My grandmother was also diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer and given 2 weeks to live. And obviously, you're not going to announce the first stages of a pregnancy, but because my grandmother was going to die, we thought that we would let her know that she was going to be a great grandmother. And if I can, describe the emotion in that palliative care room was, I witnessed something. And she responded back. She was so proud. I was so proud. And she said, I can't wait to meet my great-grandchild. And I said, that's not possible. I'm not that good at math, but 2 weeks, 9 months is not going to work out. I remember her just squeezing my hand and saying, Guy, I'm going to stay. And I just looked back immediately and I said, well, then you stay then. And so daily, my wife and I, we showed up at palliative care at 7 o'clock for my grandmother's 2 favorite shows, Wheel of Fortune, Jeopardy, and Black Starbucks coffee, and very competitive. And we battled it out. And then a month had passed, and then 2, and then 3, and you can see the struggle. I described what my grandmother was fighting, was similarly what I was fighting when I was trying to just stay alive. That survival inside a person. And then we got in the ultrasound. We found out it was a boy, and we named him Noah, and we brought the ultrasound back, and she was holding the ultrasound like she was holding him. And she loved the name. The reason why you show up in people's lives is not because you have an expectation or an outcome in people's lives. You know why you show up for people? Because you care. That's why you show up. You're not always going to change people's circumstances, but what we will do is you'll change a moment in those circumstances that will empower people. I didn't know the outcome. I just kept showing up. 9 months later, we wheeled her out of palliative care, and she held her great-grandson, Noah, for the first and only time. It's the only picture. When we brought Noah home, I went back by myself. I didn't want to witness I saw my grandmother struggle. And I told her I wanted to just say thank you. Thank you for never giving up on me. Thank you for when I was in jail that you sent me money. Thank you for showing up at moments that I needed you the most. Thank you for just thinking about me all my whole life. I've never felt I deserved anything. But what you gave me was something that I'll never forget. And she said, I had to stay. I had to make sure that you were going to be okay, Guy. I said, Grandma, I'm okay. What my grandmother taught me all those years in the downtown east side is just how powerful human connection is. And what she showed me in the downtown east side is what I gave back to her, is showing up at palliative care every day so she could witness a journey of a pregnancy that gave her the ability to fight to live. Something that we as people have no business in understanding is the power of survival inside of a human spirit. You cannot break it. When all the chips are on the table, people fight, but they need support. A short time later, we had gotten a call that my grandmother passed, and I was sad, but I was also very happy. Sad that the woman that I would no longer physically talk to was a memory, but the gift was what she gave to me. Christmas morning, 12 years ago, this Christmas, I was sleeping in this doorway with a sleeping bag. It's right across from the West Hotel in the downtown east side of Vancouver, and some random stranger woke me up. And she gave me a coffee. She gave me a hug. She gave me $50 and she said, Merry Christmas. I still see her gray jacket walking down Carroll Street, turning right on Pender. She never looked back. In the darkest moment of my life in that doorway, that woman gave me something. She gave me hope. Nobody wakes people up. Who would do such a thing? I have so many questions. I put out many calls on social media to this random stranger in her act of kindness, how much it meant to me in the darkest moments of my life. That if you remember me, I try to pay that forward. You gave me a gift. I've never forgotten you. I have many questions. Was that coffee hers and she just gave it to me, or did she buy a coffee and was going to randomly give it to somebody? Hope, kindness. She provided a gift. What she gave me was something that helped me a few months later break free. Also, many years ago, I was on VPD's most wanted list. In 2021, I was Vancouver Magazine's top Power 50 list. Also, the Courage to Come Back Award recipient, the King Charles III Award recipient. Take that, VPD, people recover. People always remember how you made them feel. They're never going to forget you. How do you want to be received? You want to be received as the person that's negative and that they won't reach out for help, or do you want to be received as the person that's positive? Because I'll tell you, you have to build relationships with people. This is one of the biggest things with harm reduction, is that it builds those connections and relationship with people. Also, this just happened a few weeks ago where I got an office from the President of the United States, which was very humbling from the life that I once lived. But I don't get anywhere in my life without people giving me opportunity, without people showing up. I want to tell you this. Going into addiction treatment doesn't solve the fact of homelessness. This is not rocket science. I'll tell you a story of a girl that I knew for many years in the downtown east side. She had 11 years of sobriety. She fell back into the downtown east side of Vancouver, and I used to outreach her when I was an outreach worker. I'd say, hey, let's just get you back into treatment. She says, Guy, if I get housing, I'll get sober. I said, well, let's get you housing then. And that took years. I kept showing up. We kept battling. And guess what? We got her housing. And she was so happy that she had housing. And then I just never heard from her for a while. About 3 months ago, I received an email from her to me saying, I'm taking 1 year sobriety. My kids are giving me my cake. I'd like you to come and give me my medallion if you have time. I said, I have time. I show up at one of the most powerful meetings I've ever been at, hearing her kids share about their mom. But also, what she said to me is, Guy, remember when I told you, I get housing, I get sober. It did take me a little bit longer to achieve that, but I had 99 problems. Who'd have thought solving housing would solve 90 of them? Now I'm ticking off the other 9. That's how important housing first is for people. People need a home to turn off the mind, to rest physically, to have safety. There is no safety on the street. The focus is surviving. You can't thrive. You can't expect me to live outside of that world with no opportunity. I have to do the things against my character that I don't want to do, but I have no choice because we're not there. Remember that wherever you go, we need to push hard. Housing is that human right that people deserve. This is just some of the stuff that I post on social media, so I expect how many ever people in this room to start following. And I am very outspoken. I'm not afraid to speak my mind. I'm not afraid to speak my experience. I'm not afraid to call people out. I try to do it in the best frame of mind possible and being diplomatic and understanding that we don't all have to agree. We all have to agree on one thing, is that people need a home, people need to be treated fair, and people need to be treated with respect. And sadly, in our country, sometimes that's just non-existent. I hope this inspires all of you to do better and be better. And I want you to all understand this, that what you do makes such a huge impact in people's lives. I am truly humbled to be around so many great people and so many powerful advocates that are trying to do whatever it takes to support people in our world. I know oftentimes that people don't like us for supporting poor people. But guess what? One day it'll all be revealed that what you do is the most important work on the planet. You're the gift. Remember that. People depend on you. People love you for it. And people care. Thanks for listening.
Now, if that doesn't get us motivated, what will? You show up because you care, right? Do we care? Guy, thank you so much for that. Thank you for sharing your experience. Thank you for sharing your pain. And thank you for inspiring all of us to do the work that we do every day. And my job now is very simple. It's to remind you that your workshops start at 10 o'clock. Please be there on time out of respect for all of the terrific presenters that you're going to hear from. Let's go get some coffee and let's be on time for the next sessions. Thank you very much.